دين الأنبياء إنه الإسلام نور وضياء قسما بالله رب العالمين ما ارتضينا غير دين الله دين فهو دين الحق دين الأنبياء إنه الإسلام نور وضياء
هذا الدر وهذه الكلم بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار الظلم وحلا في مولده النغم.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome to Finding Me today in the ITV networks with my very special guest, Faruk Hoosain, who is with Class Consulting. Faruk has consolidated 42 years of work in the education sector in order to develop different models of education, teaching and learning in order to help learners to consolidate or to reach a better potential in what it is that they're learning, and also to help the teachers to teach the children in a better way, and in that way perhaps to bring together the achievement gap that South Africa so desperately needs. And I think it's fantastic that we have him here with us, considering that education is such a big topic, and that is one of our very own from our community who has a vested interest in this particular project and who has spent much time in terms of trying to contribute positively and holistically to education. So with that, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Faruk, and thank you for being here.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for this great opportunity to share with you my experiences and my insights, which I hope will impact on your viewers who might find an interest in education.
No, they definitely will, and I'm sure it's fantastic that you've made this time to be here, considering that you've done tremendous work with FET colleges. You contributed to curriculum development, you focused on teacher training and the holistic development of different forms of teaching in the classroom and outside to help teachers as well as learners. These are important conversations, because when you look at South Africa, if you look at the education, especially in terms of basic education, there's a big outcry in terms of the way learners are performing, how they're learning, and more importantly is the fact that there seems to be a neglect in that teacher student relationship. So I'm sure you had to focus on all of these issues and bring them to the fore, and then try and find sustainable methods of improving what we do at the basic level.
You know, Quraysha, you brought up such powerful concepts, perhaps inadvertently, but certainly it reflects your own passion for the craft. I should like to say that, for teaching to be effective, as you know, you need to have a conscience of the craft, yes, and a craft of conscience.
Yes.
And so if you don't have a conscience, you will come into the class completely unprepared and just be a fact manager. You'll just come there and dispense with the facts. You'll do what we refer to in the literature as vicious compliance,
right,
where you mindlessly just go about to tick off the boxes. Okay. And so I should like to warn against that advisedly, because it means that you lose the passion. What you really need in this job, and even at my age, at 63, I can tell you, you need a vision of society. You need to be clear about what is your vision of society. What kind of citizen do we really want? And that is reflected in the critical outcomes which we have, which many teachers, Quraysha, have actually forgotten. Now, that's in a sense unethical, in a large sense unethical, because if you are mindful that one of the critical outcomes is collecting, analyzing and evaluating information, you will then know that learners need to read and write and have some oracy in the classroom, even if you use ICT. And so they need to know how to research. They need to know the skill of how to synthesize and not just parrot other people's wisdom and other people's words, quite apart from it being, them being guilty of plagiarism.
So you're already speaking about at this young age developing a critical mind.
Absolutely. So in fact, in England, there is an approach called philosophy in the classroom, where grade R learners are even taught questions around justice, where I come with a packet of chips. As you know, this research was actually done many years ago, and I give more chips to the blue-eyed children or sweets to the blue-eyed children and fewer to the other people. So it was in fact, the other research called Pygmalion in the classroom is where a teacher was told that a class that was so-called troublesome was in fact a brilliant class, and the teacher approached that class with the expectation required from a brilliant class. they changed their attitude. Whereas the brilliant class was told to the teacher that that class is a troublesome class. Right. And the teacher responded accordingly. So yes, Quraysha, I think what's required is a proper theory of society first, before you have a theory of what kind of learner I want. Because there has to be some kind of alignment. And of course, you don't expect to develop uncritical citizens. You expect to develop citizens that are creative, ingenious, inventive, and citizens who are problem solvers, and citizens who care. Because if we're thinking that it costs a lot of money to upskill and reskill teachers, I think we only have to look at the consequence of ignorance. And that's not anything new. It's as old as the hills. So I'm suggesting, as you are suggesting in your opening remarks, that we need teachers who have an education of the head, the heart, the hand, and the spirit. So I'm very interested in the spirituality of the moment. What's the spirituality of the moment in this interview? How am I sharing insights and unconditional ideas unconditionally with you and your viewers? And also, what's the spirituality in your questions? As Rumi would have it said, that the answer lies in the question.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So if I listen carefully to what you have just said, it seems to me that we have a very long way to go, because there seems to have been a total unseating first of basic education in South Africa. I mean, I have pondered this question for the longest time, and I haven't found a sufficiently good answer as to why we so drastically overhauled the education system come 1994. I mean, the change, to the OBE system, when it was a system that had failed in other countries and it was brought here. Yes, there was a need to change, certainly, but I mean, we could have opted for a much better system maybe. The fact that our teachers were not sufficiently skilled, the shutting down of the teaching training colleges, which brought a huge shortage of educators into the system. I mean, these things must be impacting on the work that you do, because we already had a backlog based on what apartheid did in terms of Bantu education and to black education in South Africa. Then we came and we changed the entire process and went into something that was almost a dismal failure. And now we have to rework again, but it's almost as if you're starting from scratch.
No, you're very deep in your thinking, and I appreciate that. Yes, I agree with you. I think one of the errors that we have made is the shutting down of teacher training colleges. I would say advisedly, and it might interest you as an academic, that we actually got the highest marks in the world for a transformed curriculum for curriculum 2005 at the University of Cambridge, but the lowest marks in the world for implementation.
Wow. I just need to advise the viewers on that point, that you've also received a UNESCO award for excellence in education.
Alhamdulillah, yes. Thank you. I really appreciate. I really, humbly acknowledge that affirmation, and it's excuse the gainsaying and excuse the ego, but it's actually the 8th time that we have been awarded this for our contribution in raising the bar, as it were.
Right.
So I'm mindful of the accolade, but I'm also mindful of the pressure that it puts on one to perform again an even better way and to raise the bar higher still.
So based on what you just said, Faruk, the problem is that we have the policy, but we're not implementing.
We are really not implementing in a sound way. And for instance, if you look at the initial curriculum, the transition was very difficult. I was one of 7 people on the national curriculum transformation board, and out of that 7, it might interest your viewers to know 4 were Muslim. So clearly our values had impacted. One of it is the concept of shura, or consultation. Right. So we captured it not as shura, but as, or even the South African concept of Ubuntu, we captured it as, working in a team. And we also captured the first revelation as learning how to learn. So read in the name of the Lord that created you was caught in the a critical outcome or the life role of learning how to learn. Also the whole question of hard work and being entrepreneurial and having initiative was caught in the concept of learning how to earn. So values do serve as a filter in the way in which you approach life and living, in the way in which you hope to create mindsets, in the way in which you wish to create ways of seeing and ways of thinking. And so with the initial curriculum, because I think your point is right, with all the changes that happened, it led to curriculum or innovation fatigue.
I can imagine.
Our teachers are very, very tired. Yeah. In fact, what was missing in the initial curriculum was that there were not sufficient, descriptors of quality. So in other words, if I know in grade 1 that the learner must be able to read 10 words by the end of the first term, then I will know that that's a quality indicator. If I know that there are test specifications, in other words, if I know that those 10 words must be tested in the following way, then I will be assisted. So those two areas were the blind spots in the curriculum. Now what we have is that we have a curriculum that is 1 mile wide and 1 inch deep, rather than being 1 mile deep and 1 inch wide. And so that is what we have at the moment. That's actually a major blind spot. In fact, we are over testing. Yes. We test every week. We have 10 far too much.
And it's a stress on the student.
It is stressing students and burning out our teachers. You have 11 weeks in the term. 2 weeks are 1 week is for getting acquainted, 1 week is for reporting and so on, and then you have 10 tasks to assess. So 1 task a week. The cardinal rule is a feedback, and there's no feedback. And so that is actually the blind spot at the moment. We need to reduce the number of tests. We need to have test specifications that will tell teachers how to test and what item to test on. And that is what we need to look at as a country.
Okay, so we have to go to a break, but when we come back, I just want to take you up on a few of those points for greater clarity, because I still think that although people might understand, in my mind, there's still a lot of gaps which I need to fill. And so I'm going to interrogate you on this if you don't mind. So we'll see you after the break.
بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار ظلم وحلا في مولده النغم بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار ظلم وحلا في مولده النغم.
Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah, and welcome to the second segment today in Finding Me in the ITV networks with my very special guest Faruk Hoosain, who has been in education for the last 42 years. And I'm going to grind Faruk because I have so many gaps in my mind that I need to be filled so that I can understand why is it that we have gone so hopelessly long, especially when you consider what the higher education students have done, fighting for free higher education, and then the argument has been thrown in their face that before you get free higher education, work on basic education first, because that's a mess. So Faruk, basic education is known or is said to be a mess in South Africa. You speak about this blind spot that we have in our curriculum. Now before I come to that, I want to go right back to the very first thing that you said, and that you said that you're before Muslims working on curriculum transformation, and this was like from post 1994, right?
Post 1994. And there were interesting stories there too, but I'll chat with you about it.
Okay, so the question that I have then is, when you speak of curriculum transformation, firstly, what grades were you looking at? Were you looking at it right from grade 1 or grade R right to matric, or did you focus on specific grades? And what specific areas were you focusing on in terms of curriculum transformation?
Yeah, so what we were involved in was in fact synthesizing 18 different curricula of 18 different apartheid departments.
Wow.
It was a mammoth task.
Right.
And at the risk of gainsaying, I think the Committee of 7 really played a vital historical role. And we had to cope with racism. We had to cope with, white right-wingers who when they walked past the room where the halal food was, would make a cross. And we had to accommodate and liaise with them. They were referred to as the absorbees, and we were referred to as the arrivees.
Okay.
And so, yes, we had the ideological wherewithal, and they had the technical wherewithal. So you had to be extremely wise.
To accommodate the both.
You had to accommodate the both. You had to be like Mandela, who knew that when the National Party ministers were running the cabinet, they were getting an in-service. So we had to get our in-service from people who knew that when you are writing a policy document, you need to understand the role of the verb, that's the evidence. You need to know about the noun because that's the content. You need to know about the adjective because that's the range, and that will tell you how far and how deep you've got to go. So I think, when we are talking about the curriculum and curriculum changes, it was a mammoth task from grade 1, in fact grade 1, because then only later on grade R, or what was referred to as grade 0, all the way to grade 12.
So you worked across the spectrum?
We worked right across the
looking
spectrum.
At history, geography, science, everything.
Everything. And the process was fascinating, and that's just it. It was a process. It was
a process of building.
It was a process of building trust between different ideological camps, and making people realize that when you are putting down the verb and you're fighting for the verb, that's not as important as the next important quality of government, which was quality assurance. Recall that we had equity, access, redress, but government also had a fourth important quality that was neglected because people were high on ideology and low on quality, which is exactly where your misgivings are coming from, that we have to focus on quality assurance as well. And so my area was in the area of assessment. So what is the use of you asking the learners to look at a concept, for some controversial, on evolution, and then you don't know how to assess it? So I was interested in accommodating faith-based institutions with their worldview and those who have a more materialist approach to the concept of evolution.
But that's good, because I think just saying that indicates that you are already then allowing for creative and critical discourse in the class.
For creative and critical discourse, and I also am mindful that you are passionate about the concept of power and power relations and whose interest does certain decisions serve. And so, yes, the issue around critical theory and the practices of people like Paulo Freire and their pedagogy of the oppressed, and people like critical theorists like Ira Shaw, all of these people had impacted on the way in which we wanted to transform the curriculum. Yeah, it was hard work, but sometimes in a meeting you begin to realize that it is the power in the word and not the power of the word.
Yeah.
So if you know that if you have a word in the curriculum that talks about transformation, that is more powerful than worrying about how loudly you say it in a meeting. And so you got to also pull that through. Because if you say that, if you're asking a learner a question on transformation in South Africa, you can actually layer the question even with greater depth by adding one word to it called might. How might the history of South Africa have been different had we not had CODESA, for instance, as flawed as it was?
Yes.
And so I'm suggesting...
But I think take CODESA as an example of compromise.
As an example of compromise. Now, we can take the next question, which would be a critique of CODESA and the sunset clause and so on and so forth. So, in fact, what we had suggested was that you even have to question the question.
Yes.
And
that's a big thing today, realistically. And so when questioning the question, I want to come to a very important question, because it relates to exactly what you said about the sunset clauses and how might the history of South Africa have been different. The question is, why did we collapse history into social sciences? Why did we take it away and not leave it as an independent subject? I mean, because for me, history is so important.
I think It was one of the things that dealt with resources. It was one of the things that dealt with the issue around time. Because when you're dealing with a structure like a school, you have to try and find the right balance between the administrative criteria and the educational criteria, and then you have to look at the impact of resources. And one of the most powerful resources, the resource of time. And so, geography is the mother of all sciences. It should have been left on its own. I think history, with its habits of mind and ways of thinking, should also have been left on its own. But there is much research that has been done in the area of integrated learning, and you find this particularly in the Waldorf schools, where they have integrated, in a thematic way, the skills of geography, the skills of history. So I think what we were far too ambitious in the undertaking of collapsing history and geography, without understanding that there are about 10 different ways of integrating the curriculum. And in fact, the research shows that if you really want to upskill and reskill teachers in integrating the curriculum in 10 different ways, and you're really going to have to spend a lot of time. So yes, I'm partial to understanding what you are saying, and I think the failure of collapsing the curriculum was not taking note of how ambitious and enterprise the suggestion was.
Do you find that in the basic education, and I would say definitely too in higher learning, that there is just maybe perhaps too much emphasis on the sciences without recognizing the value and contribution of social sciences and the humanities per se, the subjects, in terms of creativity? If you look at the faith-based schools, we focus very little attention on creativity, yet it is from creativity that you have innovation and that you have, maybe lots of problem solving, etc. And I think these aspects of the curricula, or motivating schools to delve deeper into it, seems to be missing so we have this almost robotic kind of individuals that are channeled through these 12 years, brought into a higher institution, which is just as robotic as go into medicine, go into accounting, go into law, go into science, that you're producing you're manufacturing actually a particular kind of a robot to produce in a particular way for society, but we're not contributing to problem solving and reaching fantastic solutions, or to achieve solutions in order to handle the wickedness of society and the problems that society faces today.
I think that's such a deep understanding of the role of the arts. And I taught at Orient Islamic Secondary School, and it called Orient Islamic State-Aided Secondary School at that time. It was some of the best years of my life. And I was privileged to have been part of 11 schools in KwaZulu-Natal in the then House of Delegates to have introduced the study called speech and drama, or cynically referred to as spit and dribble. And in fact, one of the examiners of a wonderful interviewer was myself, when she was presenting her regional speech, and she won it hands down. And that wonderful student is none other than yourself. You may not recall.
No, I don't.
But it was thousands of years ago, when I was much better looking, and I had a thinner waistline then.
Oh my God,
but
Faruk.
so I'm suggesting that you can teach the creative arts in a faith-based school. And yes, you're absolutely right. The research indicates that the backwash effect is that those students become better problem solvers. They are more inventive, more creative, more ingenious. Some of my students are top-notch students today. I'm thinking
I have no doubt.
Yeah, I'm thinking of people like Ghulam Faroon, who's the registrar at the university. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. If I could teach dramatic arts in an Islamic environment, bearing in mind the ethos of the faith-based school. And so clearly, for instance, when you are teaching movement, the movement doesn't have to be the Michael Jackson type movement. The movement is, it's creative movement. Think of yourself as being a small seed. Now begin to grow and grow until you're a big oak tree. Surely you're becoming aware of your laterals, you're becoming aware of your spatial awareness and temporal awareness. And that is what creative movement is about. So people who do not have an understanding of the creative arts, or people who say, no, we can't teach visual arts because you're going to have eyes and so on, do not understand that if you teach your learners how to draw the sunset from this beautiful environment at exactly the same time every day, that creates an acuity of awareness, of a visual acuity, and so on and so forth. Also a sense of their mortality. So the arts have a powerful role to play. A last quick rejoinder to say that it's interesting how banks will now employ people who have one creative art subject, like music, because that has a backwash effect on accounting, on spatial reasoning. Yeah.
Okay, so we're at the end of this particular interview, but we're coming back for a second one, which we will then release it the following week. I just want a quick rejoinder from you to consolidate everything. Is that taking from your spirituality of the moment, just as a parting thought, what would you say then is the spirituality of the moment of including this drama and arts into the faith-based Muslim schools?
I believe that it will make them aware that, of the grandeur of God Almighty. That if I look around me and I see the beauty of creation with a capital C, surely with a small c, I will stand in awe of the big C of creation. And I will then say, oh, I have created this movement piece, or I have created this playlet. And how great is the power of the divine good and the divine light to have created all of this? What is the purpose behind it all? If this is how it is, how else can it be? If I've created the play with this ending, as I have done at the university, where I've created a play that's localized, I had my students suggesting to me that perhaps we need to have two different endings. So I think the spirituality of the moment, when people have created their creative pieces, the real learning happens after the creation, and they will stand in awe of, if this is how it is, how else can it be?
But thank you very much for that, Faruk. We're going to come back in the next one. We'll see you next week. Fi amanillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
قسما بالله رب العالمين ما ارتضينا غير دين الله دين فهو دين الحق دين الأنبياء إنه الإسلام نور وضياء.
هذا الدر وهذه الكلم بمديح الهادي تنتظم